So now we saw all the different factors that affect grain during storage. So what to do to have good storage? Well, the first thing is to apply good practices. But first, before doing those, we need to develop and apply a good quality control and assurance program. So the first step in a quality assurance and control program will be the part of receiving and sampling. So it's very important to do and have a good sampling procedure and then have a good way to analyze all the feed ingredients. So always do your inspection at receiving, sample correctly, create your composite and representative sample, and quantify that feed ingredient quality by composition, moisture content, pest infestation, if there's any contaminants present like mycotoxins, rocks, any type of pathogens, and also, of course, any other analysis you need to do based on each feed ingredient characteristics. When you're trying to do this type of analysis, keep in mind that the best way to create is a good standard operating procedure from receiving all the way to analysis, so you have all the steps that you need to do in an organized way. After that first step of a quality assurance and control program of receiving and sampling, the second step will be to understand your facility for several reasons, because understanding your facility can help you do a better job for different things. For example, developing a sanitation program. That is the way to clean out to avoid having or prevent to having any type of residue of feed ingredient or finished feed, because having those residues can attract pests because that's their food source. So I'm not saying that you have to clean your facility every day, all of it. What I'm suggesting here and recommending is to develop kind of like a diagram where you could analyze which of your areas, specific areas in your feed mill, get dirtier than others and more constantly. So you could focus more resources in cleaning there, and then the ones that don't get that dirty, then do it on a more spaced out time. I put it here in the example of zone 1. That could be those areas in your feed mill that get dirtier, like the dumping pit or the area where you have your grinding equipment like hammer mills and rolling mills. And zone 2, those areas that not necessarily you have the leakage or that residue accumulation, and if there's some, it will be minimal. Then you could actually plan your cleaning of all your equipment and your external and internal facilities by programming at the same time with maintenance through a calendar to avoid any type of production loss. Also, as part of understanding your facility, it's important to develop an integrated pest management program, IPM, that can help you prevent and control insects, rodents, and birds. One thing that we recommend for rodents is to take a diagram of your facility and then mark where you're going to put your traps. Keep in mind that traps that you put outside your facility can have some sort of poison, but especially the ones that have a long delay effect in order for that rodent to die when it eats it. If you have something that is immediately, they're more likely going to end up having a dead rat there. And also, if another rat sees one eating something and dies, they will not eat it. Internally, good manufacturing practices will tell you that traps cannot have any sort of poison. So the traps that you need to use are the ones that the rodent gets in, gets trapped, and then they die because of a heart attack. So being said that, it's important to have that diagram and place numbers and labels to all your traps so you could keep and monitor them a control. So if your population increases of any of them, then you could go and see what is causing it. For birds, the best way is to clean and avoid having any residue of feed ingredient or any type of finished feed that could have easy access by those birds, because what they're looking is some sort of food. Other types of controls of birds like the balloons, scarecrows, ultrasounds, all the things eventually the birds will get used to and will come back. The best way is to, like I said, have your facilities as clean as possible, and also try to avoid having any high ground flat surfaces. And if you do, put some nets so birds cannot put their nest or stand there to look for food. Another way to prevent pests to enter in your facility is by applying physical barriers. It's more common to put them in warehouses, that you could prevent the entrance by putting screens, by putting plexus curtains, anything that could block up to a point the entrance of rodents, birds, or any other type of pests. Another good practice that you could do as a third step is to clean your grain before storage. Keep in mind that grain, especially corn, can carry a lot of foreign material and dust. And here I put this table of a research project that I did some years ago with the U.S. Grain Council, where I show that by cleaning your grain from whole kernel, taking the broken pieces and dust, and then from the broken corn, taking the dust out, you could see how mold and mycotoxins tend to concentrate more into that smaller particles. So if you clean your corn before storage by using some of those equipments that you see here, like a scalper, sifters, gravity cleaners, rotating sieves, that could help you take away any of that accumulation of mold, mycotoxins, and then of course you will keep longer for preservation purposes. The fourth step that I want you to look into when you're trying to have good storage practices is to apply the practices themselves. One very common one that is utilized is aeration, but it has to be done under specific conditions. Aeration is the movement of an airflow very fast through a grain mass in order to cool down the grain to avoid insects to feel comfortable to eat and reproduce and mold to growth. The issue when you're storing grain at tropical weather locations is that you might never have that temperature conditions that are ideal for aeration. Keep in mind that we always want to aerate when the temperature outside is between 30 and 32 degrees Celsius and when the relative humidity is lower than 80%. Keep in mind that those conditions, when they go higher, that's when mold starts growing faster and insects feel comfortable. Also, you need to have a temperature difference between the grain temperature and the outside temperature being at least 5 degrees lower in order to be able to work out. One key thing to understand when doing aeration is that the best way to do it is by having temperature cables that could tell you what is the actual temperature of the grain. And you can notice if there's an increase in temperature, so you could apply aeration. Also, when you're doing aeration, that same temperature cables will tell you how that airflow front is cooling down the grain. So it's one of the typical things that you could do. When aeration cannot be done due to the weather conditions that you have in your location, like tropical, then you could also do what is called grain chilling. It is pretty much the same concept as aeration, but instead of using ambient air to put it through the grain bin, you hook it up to a machine called grain chiller that actually will push air conditioning type air to cool down the grain to even cooler temperatures so they could maintain to a longer time. Aeration is one of those tools that could also help you cool down the grain, but besides that, can also take out the condensation that will accumulate between the grain surface inside a metal silo and its roof. Of course, in those places where you have tropical weather conditions that sometimes it's difficult to do aerations due to the temperature and relative humidity conditions, then you can install what we call the roof fans or exhaust fans, that they could actually pull out that hot air that accumulates at the end of the day between the grain surface and the roof to avoid that condensation when the cooler temperatures hit the night. If you're storing any type of feed ingredients or grain or oilseeds in warehouses or even bags, it is important to also install those type of exhaust fans so you could keep the air moving to keep the place as cool as possible to avoid condensation problems. Another storage practice that is also used worldwide to control mold growth is the application of mold inhibitors. Those are mainly acids like propionic acid that are mixed in the grain in solid or liquid in order to prevent the growth of mold. Keep in mind that since the majority of those products are acids, they could all end up corroding the metal equipment on the handling and the storage equipment that you have in your silo. So always use them if you really have mold problems in your grain. Also keep in mind that mold inhibitors will prevent mold from growing but will not destroy mycotoxins. Another storage practice is the application of insecticides. Insecticides are chemicals that are applied either on the external part or the internal part of any type of storage structure, but also can be mixed with the grain in order to prevent insects from coming. They will leave a residue that it doesn't have any effect on the animals or the humans that consume that grain. There's different type of insecticides out there, but check the ones that are offered in your country or in your location and that are compatible with the different grains that you're being stored. Keep in mind that insecticides, when they're mixed with grain, they're called grain protectants. These grain protectants can be mixed either in solid or liquid form with the grain as it's being loaded into any type of storage structure. Another storage practice that is widely used in the industry is the fumigation. Fumigation is the only way to actually reduce the presence and population of insects inside any type of grain mass that can be stored in flat warehouses, metal silos, or concrete silos. Keep in mind that insecticides can prevent insects from coming in, but fumigants is the only way to eradicate and reduce that population. There are several things that are very important when you're fumigating. You need to use the right dose, meaning the right amount of pellets or tablets from the fumigant that are applied based on the volume of the structure where the grain is being stored, not on the amount of grain that is inside. You need to follow all the manual instructions on that fumigant and also seal the structure so the fumigant doesn't leak out. This can avoid any potential issues with the surrounding areas since fumigants are toxic to humans and animals, and also to avoid insects from going out and then coming back into the storage structure. At the same time, getting to the right dose of concentration for the fumigant is very important. So keeping the structure sealed can get you faster to that level. Right now, there's only two fumigants that are available commercially in the industry. Phosphine, either in aluminum phosphide or magnesium phosphide. There's several brands out there. And then sulfuric fluoride with its own brands. Right now, due to different environmental concerns, in the past, methyl bromide was fairly used, but right now is banned. Another storage practice is the rotation of inventories. That pretty much means moving the grain from one storage place to another, even in the same structure. The important thing is to try to always move the product around to avoid the accumulation of pest, mold in the same place if the grain is not moved. In some places that could be called turning the grain around. That will break any cycle of mold growth and also insect concentration. Keep in mind that for feed ingredients in bags, it's very important to have the concept of the first one in is the first bag that has to go out into production, FIFO. This concludes part 2 of the presentation on storage and grain quality management. Please continue with part 3.